Okay, it is 5:31, and we will go ahead and get started with this meeting. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the California Department of Toxic Substance Control Exide ETAG meeting. The ETAG stands for Exide Technologies Advisory Group meeting. Our meeting will take place from 5:30 until 7:30. Please note that all of our meeting materials right now are online, and they are available in English and Spanish, and you can access them at www.dtsc.ca.gov/Exide. Next slide, please. My name is Dion Falk, and I will be the facilitator for this public meeting. I serve as the Public Participation Manager in the Office of Environmental Equity with the Department of Toxic Substances Control on the Exide project. Please note that you should now be able to see our PowerPoint presentation on your screen for tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. I'd like to go over our meeting guidelines with you. We want you to be aware that by participating in this meeting, you understand that this meeting is being recorded. You also understand that you will be muted for background noise. In addition, the chat feature will be used for DTSC informational purposes. Please pay close attention to our chat to receive important DTSC information, contact emails, phone numbers, and updates. We will allow you an additional time at the end of our meeting to make copies of the information posted in the chat. We ask that you limit your comments to allow everyone the opportunity to participate during our meeting. This Exide ETAG public meeting will focus on the residential cleanup and the Exide facility closure. However, if you have other Exide questions, please call our hotline number. You can call us at 844-225-3887. Let me give you that number one more time. Our hotline number is 844-225-3887. Next slide, please. To support language and captions this evening, simultaneous Spanish audio interpretation is available. Click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select a language. It is important for everyone in this meeting to select a language, either English or Spanish. For Spanish only audio, by phone, please call 877-920-8432 and enter code 741-502#. Again, for that Spanish only audio number, it is 877-920-8432 and enter code 741-502#. Our presentation slides are available in Spanish at dtsc.ca.gov/Exide. Automated closed captions have been turned on for this meeting. You can turn them off by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. Please note that these captions are provided for convenience only and are not the official transcript of this meeting. Next slide, please. This ETAG public meeting is being presented to you by the California Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Toxic Substances Control, also known as DTSC. Our mission is to protect California's people and the environment from harmful effects of toxic substances by restoring contaminated resources, enforcing hazardous waste laws, reducing hazardous waste generation, and encouraging the manufacture of chemically safer products. Next slide, please. You should be looking at our agenda right now, and we will have presentations from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency on the National Priorities Listings process, DTSC residential cleanup and facility closure, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, and South Coast Air Quality Management District. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to welcome our ETAG co-chairs, Dr. Meredith Williams, Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and Mark Lopez of East Yards Communities for Environmental Justice to give opening remarks. I will start with Dr. Meredith.
Thank you, Dion. Welcome all of our folks who are joining us this evening. And at long last, I'm pleased that we have full participation and can have more conversational panel flow, hopefully today, because we're going to have all the panel members available to participate and exchange. So I've been looking forward to this meeting for that reason. I don't have too many comments that I wanted to offer other than my continuing appreciation to folks for taking the time at the end of the day. A couple of us were commenting that this is the time of year where it is harder to find that extra energy to show up at this time of day, and that we're especially grateful for those of you who are carving out the time. And we hope that we can provide useful information. We're looking forward to the feedback we'll get from the ETAG members to help us do the work. I did have one announcement that I wanted to make about the department. We have Governor Newsom has named a new deputy director for our site mitigation and remediation program. His name is Todd Sachs, S-A-X, Todd Sachs. He comes to us from the California Air Resources Board, where he had oversight responsibilities for all the enforcement work at CARB. And we couldn't be more excited to have Todd on board. I think he's the right person at the right time for two very important reasons, both of which I think will resonate with all of you. First of all, that enforcement background is tremendously important to what the department is striving to do, the direction we're headed, to holding folks accountable. We've learned a lot from Exide, obviously, and we want to do everything we can to hold polluters accountable, and enforcement is foundational to our ability to do that. So we're really looking forward to the perspectives and experience he will bring to our work on cleanup and embedding that enforcement mentality in our SMRP program. Secondly, Todd has done a lot of work on community engagement and has really modeled the kinds of engagement that we are striving for: listening, learning, active early engagement, taking direction from communities, and just being in very good dialogue. So that's another reason why he's a very important person to join the department again in this moment. He unfortunately can't be here this evening. It's only his first week on the job, but he is definitely looking forward to joining upcoming community meetings and ETAG meetings, and I think you'll enjoy getting to know him, getting to work with him and partner with him as we continue to do this cleanup. With that, I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Mark.
Thank you, Meredith. First and foremost, thank you to everybody who joined today's meeting, specifically the impacted community residents, whether this is the 50th meeting or the first meeting that you come to. I really feel like residents participating is the most important part, and really the reason why these meetings even happen. This forum is critical for us, all of us, to be able to engage, to learn, to share, to dialogue, and to find paths forward. Really happy to hear about Todd joining the team. I don't know Todd personally, but I've asked around and have heard some good things. So definitely looking forward to meeting Todd and working with Todd in the future, and seeing how, obviously we prevent future Exides and deal with other ongoing issues that exist in our communities across California. I also wanted to share in the chat just a shout to Mariah Castañeda from LA Taco, who did some, sorry, can y'all hear me? Somebody asked, yeah, okay, if I was speaking. Yeah, who did some research and published an article recently in LA Taco that shed some light on some of the issues that workers have come to testify about in these meetings before, and that residents have also shared and testified about. I appreciate that contribution to the ongoing dialogue, and looking forward to the continued dialogue at tonight's meeting.
All right, thank you so much to our co-chairs, Dr. Williams and Mark Lopez. At this time, I would like to introduce Edwin Polinelli, Manager with US EPA Region 9. Edwin will give us updates on the National Priorities Listings process. Thank you so much for joining us, Edwin. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Chip Polinelli. I'm with the United States Environmental Protection Agency in the Superfund Division. And I'm here today to give an overview of the National Priorities Listing process. Next slide, please. Because the governor of the state of California has asked US EPA to add the former Exide facility and the surrounding industrial and residential area to the national priorities list, EPA has begun the process of evaluating these areas in accordance with the Federal Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA, to evaluate if the site meets the eligibility for listing on the NPL or National Priorities List. The CERCLA or Superfund program was established to identify and, if necessary, remediate releases of hazardous substances that pose a significant risk to human health in the environment, with the goals of protecting human health in the environment by cleaning up polluted sites, involving the community in the cleanup process, and making responsible parties pay for the cleanup. And finally, also returning these contaminated areas to a more productive use. Next slide. Within the Superfund program, that the hazard ranking system, or HRS, is the main mechanism at which we use to identify releases at a site and whether they warrant further investigation and possible remediation. And as illustrated below in the diagram, we are currently in the assessment stage, and that's where we look at sites and we look at whether they meet the eligibility for listing on the NPL list. If they meet the eligibility of listing, the site then proceeds down the CERCLA process to characterization, where the site is further evaluated. It goes to cleanup alternatives, and a cleanup alternative is selected. That could be a remedial option or removal option. The site then proceeds to cleanup, and then post cleanup, and eventually NPL delisting. Next slide. So the hazard ranking system, or HRS, is simply a tool for us to screen the site. It's not a site-specific risk assessment, but it is our tool for evaluating whether a site qualifies for listing. It's a mathematical model that evaluates several different pathways of risk. It looks at groundwater, surface water, soil, and air. Those pathways are then put into the mathematical model, and the site is scored. If the site achieves a score of 28.5 out of a possible 100 or greater, it then is eligible for NPL listing and further assessment under CERCLA. Next slide. Now, the NPL process has several steps, and I've highlighted here that we are currently in the first step. This is the NPL listing evaluation. If the site meets the listing criteria, we compile what's called the listing package, and that package is then provided to our headquarters for review and approval. Once approved, It's then sent to the state of California for concurrence. If the state concurs on the proposed listing is published in the Federal Register, and a 60-day comment period is open. At the end of the 60-day comment period, EPA will respond to questions, comments, and put those responses in the final public register notice of the NPL listing, and the site is then added to the NPL list. And just to summarize below, once added to the NPL list, the site then proceeds down the CERCLA process or Superfund process, which is further characterization, looking at remedy decision or cleanup decisions, cleanup, and then ultimate delisting of the site. I'll turn this back to Dion, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Okay, at this time, we will take questions and comments from our ETAG members, and then I will invite our public members to ask questions and make comments on the National Priorities Listings process. There are 4 ways to make a comment here today. If you are participating on Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. You will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn to speak. If you have dialed into the Zoom audio, press *9 to join the phone queue. I will say the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak. You can then press *6 to unmute your line. If you would like me to read your question, click the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. I want to remind you that the chat feature will be used for DTSC informational purposes. Please pay close attention to our chat to receive important DTSC information as we are answering questions and presenting. We will provide contact emails, phone numbers, and updates. We will allow you additional time at the end to copy any information that's in the chat. Lastly, if you have called into our Spanish bridge line, our Spanish interpreter will ask your questions for you. I will go to our ETAG members for their questions and comments first. And I will start with, let's start with our co-chair, let's see if our co-chairs have any.
I do not.
Okay. Okay. And right now, next in line is Felipe Aguilar, our ETAG member. Go ahead and let me unmute you, Felipe. There you go.
Right.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, my question was to Mr. Polinelli. This process that you're talking about, the EPA listing it as a Superfund site, what is the timeline that you're looking at specifically, both short-term and long-term, in terms of listing it? And what is the difference if EPA takes this on as a Superfund project? In other words, if it's listed in the National Priorities List, what does that actually mean? It means that you're going to be piggybacking on what DTSC is doing right now, or are you going to start a complete new process in terms of the cleanup?
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I can talk about the timeline first. The timeline for listing is generally about 18 months to 24 months. And that's going back to the diagram that I showed. So we would then, we take existing data, we take data in regards to the facility, and then from the listing, from our proposed package to the proposed listing to the actual listing, generally takes about 18 to 24 months. Your question about how we fit into the process already is, once listed, there are several things that the US EPA brings to the table. One is additional enforcement authority. We can take additional enforcement action, additional funding, of course, but we would not start the process over. We see this as a partnership with DTSC. DTSC has done what we feel is a very good job working on the facility closure, the residential cleanup, the assessment of the residential area. And we would not start anything over at the point that it would be listed. We would then work with DTSC on further cleanup needs of both the facility and the surrounding area.
Thank you so much for that, Edwin. We're going to go to our ETAG member, Jim Wells. You can go ahead and unmute your line and go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Sure, thanks, Dion. And
You're welcome. Thank
you, DTSC, for holding this meeting, and good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Wells. I'm the technical advisor to ETAG. And a question, Chip, for you. If the site were to be designated a Superfund site, would EPA consider this to be an orphan site? I've worked on a lot of Superfund sites, and I know how funding works for PRP funded sites, and I know how, cleanup funding works for EPA funded sites. But this is this funny thing where the state is funding the cleanup, and the state's not a PRP. So have you thought through how EPA would sort of classify this site in terms of qualifications for funding?
That's a good question, and we have started to think that. I mean, that's obviously a little bit down beyond whether it lists or not. But you're right, there are many mechanisms at which it would fund. It could be a fund lead, which EPA would get funding, as a part of our budget to take it on. There's other possibilities for funding, and we don't have, I don't have any information on where we would go with an enforcement strategy, but there could be potential enforcement actions that could be taken for other responsibilities that could fund the additional cleanup. So I would kind of parallel what you said is there are many options, and it includes both fund lead, which is appropriated funds. Then I would see if there is an enforcement action that we can take, we would then recoup those funds or get additional funds, which would be, we would consider either special account or enforcement funds, which would be fund lead money. So I would see there's possible different directions, and I think it's a little early on to comment on which direction it would be classified as.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Pete Reyes, ETAG member, please go ahead and unmute.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I did see, Edwin, that you put that you will be including community members to do the cleanup. Just want to see what exactly that means. Just trying to see if it's possible, to have community involved in making those choices and ensuring that it's community members that are being hired and that actually live in the community. And B, if it could be something where it's not just laborers. I don't know why that decision was made just to get laborers, but if it can go to another level and just get people from the community that have other degrees or that are qualified for these type of positions.
Okay. Well, let me first address the community involvement, and where the community involvement is if the diagram that I had showed is there's a public comment period just even from the start of the EPA process and the listing process. So the public would be able to comment on the proposed listing, but throughout the rest of the circular process, if the site is listed, community involvement and community participation in how we evaluate, how we assess the site, the remedies for cleanup, all involve community engagement. Now, your direct question in regards to whether we would engage the community for labor or how that would be more of a contracting question, and what remedies selected, if it's a removal or if it's some kind of remedy, and how the contracting would be done. And I think it's too far along, or not far enough along, is I couldn't really speak to how the contracting would be. who the contractor would be selected, how the contractor would hire their labor. I think that's beyond what I can talk to you about right now, because right now we're focused on whether the site will be listed and the community engagement of the CERCLA process and the cleanup process. The contracting is a little bit further down the road.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I see Rania has her hand raised. Go right ahead, Rania, with your question.
Hi, and thank you for the opportunity to the platform that we're having right now. So I have two questions. One is, if you could just share with us, Chip, if it gets listed as a Superfund site, does that mean that the current mechanism being used to clean Exide no longer becomes, if it sunsets or it goes away because now it is called a Superfund site? I understand that you may be able to reach for more funding as the need arises, but does what is happening now, that funding source stops and the EPA Superfund money kicks in? So it's the mechanism of money, is what I'd like to ask about. And then the second one is about community participation. Do you have standards that you follow, or will you follow in the footsteps of what DTSC currently holds and calls community engagement in this process? Or is there something else that you have in plan? I think I'd be curious to know, what else are you thinking of, or are you just simply going to follow these pathways that already exist and that have been in use?
So let me talk to the community involvement. So yeah, under CERCLA, or the CERCLA Superfund, there is prescriptive procedures and ways to engage the community. So we as EPA would take on we have community involvement coordinators that work with us, and what we have is remedial project managers that do the work. We have different ways of engaging the community, whether it's, going door to door with fact sheets, engaging the community in public meetings. So we do have a process which we follow for how we engage the communities throughout the process, even from the listing to the delisting of the site. Every stage with the site assessment, the remedy selection, how the remedy is determined, the proposed remedy, that is all community involvement, community meetings, and we do follow a Superfund process. I mean, we would completely, as we are now, we would engage the state in community involvement as well. I see us as partners. I think we're working alongside. The state has provided EPA with a great amount of data that's helping our evaluation and helping to streamline our listing process. So I think the two agencies working together will only complement each other. Now, as far as the funding question, I have to defer to METI or DTSC on the funding, what's left in the funding, how that funding would be utilized. But at the point that the site would be listing, again, we would be working with DTSC, not to restart the project, but actually to understand where the funding is and where the work that DTSC is progressing with, whether it's the facility cleanup, the residential cleanup. But our funding would come to support our process. So as we further investigate the site, investigate the impacted areas, that funding would support that work in the CERCLA process that I outlined in the previous slides. So again, I see this as complementary and using our funds to follow our process, but in partnership with DTSC, because DTSC has already progressed so far with looking at the facility as well as the other impacted areas.
Thank you so much for that. I want to see if we have a couple more questions. I see that Rafael Yanez has a question.
I'm sorry, Dion. I think that METI may be able to speak to the part of.
Oh, sure.
Part of Rania's.
Okay.
thank you, Chip, and I think you have summarized it really nicely. And the objective, we were really working with the US EPA, and our main objective, Rania, is to make sure that that funding can coincide with the funding we currently have. That's what we're aiming at. And our objective is to make sure that we have very little to no interruption to the ongoing work, because we would like this cleanup to continue while we're waiting for this this listing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Mehdi. And I believe one of our ETAG members, Jane Williams, had a question as well. Jane, did you still want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's hard for me to understand how this funding is going to work when there's a long-term stable source of funding for the residential cleanup. Is EPA considering, and as well as you probably know, the state lost its cost recovery case a couple weeks ago. So I can't imagine that EPA would overfile and try to get cost recovery. So is there some thought here that DTSC would continue to do the residential cleanup and maybe EPA would be focused more on the commercial area cleanup? And then also just to point out that this is now the third DTSC permitted hazardous waste facility that will become a Superfund site and be cleaned up with a federal contribution. The first one was Stringfellow acid pits. The second one is Rochem up in San Francisco. So this will be the third one. So EPA clearly has some experience here in cleaning up the state's hazardous waste permitted facilities. So can you explain to us how that experience is going to help here or hinder here, if it will?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, is are you asking how we would fund the cleanup or progress with the further cleanup? And if that's, I just want to confirm that that's your question.
Well, I mean, the state's already there cleaning things up, and it already has a long-term stable source of funding to continue that cleanup. So, I mean, I don't think the community is going to be very happy if you guys are out there tripping over each other. So, like,
Okay.
what do you think that, where's the value added here? Like,
Well, where we see the value is as in partnership with DTSC. I don't see us as we're doing, and Mehdi, I would like to parallel on what Mehdi said is I see this as a process that we would evaluate how we would pick it up if the site lists, of course, and how we would work together to make sure there's a continuation of cleanup, that there's not a delay. So I think we would continue to work with DTSC in their abilities to get cleaned up, their existing funding, as well as evaluate what our funding mechanisms if the site lists, as well as as it goes through the CERCLA process, and we evaluate the impact area and what our funding mechanisms are. Whether we can enforce. That's something that that's something that's down the road. But I see as if the site lists, we would complement already what DTSC is doing and work in partnership, not against each other or not duplicating efforts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we are going to turn to our community members. We have a few hands raised.
I'm sorry, Dion.
Yes.
Dr. Sapti put her hand up.
Oh,
again.
she put it. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
It's okay. Thank you. So it's just to follow up on Jane Williams' question. I think the topic of what value added will it be to the community is going to be an important topic that's going to come back over and over and over and over again. And I think what we're trying to say here, and I'm adding my voice to Jane's, is that will be something we're going to want to know more about. We appreciate what DTSC is doing. We're happy the cleanup is happening. There's also been a lot of issues. And I think people would like to know that you've been mindful of those issues as opposed to just complimenting and doing what DTSC does. They do a fine job. There's a lot more and better that can be done. And I would look to EPA for an agency that's going to now really come and add value, not just do the same. Otherwise, why? I mean, if you're looking for public comments, you go on approval of the community. We are part of that community, and there's a bigger, grouping beyond. There's going to be something that will need to be demonstrated to us in order for us to see that this is really a good thing for EPA to list us and for you guys to go forward. And I think that's what we're trying to communicate here to you. So
Okay.
please let us know and think of the fact that this is going to be something we're going to be looking to in order to support you in that process. We're going to want to see the added value given the issues that have arisen before with the community. And there's plenty of those. And if you want to hear more about it, hopefully you will continue to ask more questions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that comment and that clarification.
All right. I think that covers everyone, our ETAG members. So why don't we transition over to our community members real quick? We have a couple of hands that's been patiently waiting. Rafael Yanez, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line. And please feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks, Dion, and thank you, everyone, for having these meetings. Just to hopefully my comment to this whole value-added aspect of the US EPA stepping in and looking at this as a Superfund site. So just to kind of give some of the ETAG members some perspective to think about and consider, the current threshold right now for property cleanup is about 200 ppm of lead. So those properties below that threshold are not being currently cleaned up. However, if, let's say, the EPA elects this as a Superfund site, then we can go ahead as a community, push for comparable community background levels of lead of, say, like 25 ppm, because, and again, this goes now towards the US EPA in looking at this community and evaluating it as a proposed listing. I'm hoping that the US EPA considers not only this source of contamination and spread, but also the cumulative impacts to this particular community, because we are a highly impacted community. I just left the AB 617 meeting to join this one, because we are a highly polluted and highly impacted community. This is just one of the other companies that has polluted our neighborhoods for the past 40, 50 years now, 40 years of operation, and now 10 years going through the cleanup effort. The other consideration is that there was a federal court judge, unfortunately, that was has allowed the owners, or the past owners, of the former Exide Battery Corporation to ultimately just pay some sort of small restitution, and has now allowed them to fully wash their hands of the site and walk away. Now it's left it to the community members and now the state, the DTSC, to perform all this cleanup, and with no ability to really go back after them. So, we're looking for the federal government, because the federal judge was the one that came down with this ruling. We're now really looking for help here as community members and as city representatives to have the federal government step in and help clean up what the federal judge has allowed ultimately for these owners to get away with. And so we're hoping and hopeful that it gets listed, and that the residents, the community, and those impacted by the lead levels. And I really do hope that the US EPA looks at things like groundwater contamination, because we have a number of smaller cities and smaller municipal water companies that are actually pumping well water all around this site. And as you know, because of the sustained drought, those the drawdown in the levels have been significant. And so a lot of these water purveyors are seeing well water contamination and all that other stuff in different constituents, if you will. But it won't be long because of the drawdown that they'll start contaminating with the leaching of lead and arsenic and other heavy metals that have been reported here on site because of the close proximity also to the LA River and the major aquifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Raphael. Appreciate your comments. We have some other ETAG members that have raised their hand, and then also Medi would like to make a comment, but I believe Jane had her hand up first. So Jane, do you want to come on off mute?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, right now the soil cleanup level that the federal government has is 400 parts per million. And our soil cleanup level in California is 80. EPA has said that they're going to change that level, but there's no deadline for them to do that. So my question to EPA is, are you guys going to use the 80 ppm number as the applicable rule and requirement for this cleanup? Have you considered that the cleanup levels are different?
Yes, we are. I mean, we're aware of both or I'm aware of both your comment is that, yes, I know there is an evaluation going on the current RSLs and RMLs of the cleanup levels for lead. And I don't have any more information on when that decision will be made. In regards to the cleanup level for Exide, that will be evaluated after this site is listed. So that's actually, as you know, Jane, that's in the process of where you get into the RI and the risk assessment and evaluating that. So I really can't speak to what the cleanup level would be until we get further on in the process.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say right now, like, we do not want to be in a position where EPA's old, outdated cleanup level for lead starts grading against our new updated cleanup level for lead. It would not be worth it to have the site listed if that's the outcome. We need to know that before it's listed, not after it's listed. So we need to know from the administrator if she is going to consider the 80 ppm cleanup level that the state of California currently has as an ARAR. Similar to California having more stringent requirements on perfluorinateds in groundwater, PFAS, I mean, you know, perchlorate, other, you know the drill here. California has a lot more stringent requirements, and under normal circumstances, it follows the ARARs, but we don't want to be in a position down the road 18 months from now where, you know, we're getting immeasurably dirtier cleanup on the ground because the site was listed. So I urge you to go back and talk to Dana and Jeff Scott and Debbie Jordan and the administrator about this, because that would not be a very good policy outcome, and folks on the ground are going to be very unhappy if that becomes the issue, the outcome.
Thank you.
We don't want to be there. Yeah, we don't want to be there.
I will take that back to them. Thank you, Jane.
That would be great.
Thank you. And we're just going to take 2 more hands, and then we're going to move on to our next set of presentations so that we can stay on track to end on time. Okay. So I'm going to go to Mark Lopez, our co-chair. Go ahead and unmute, Mark.
Thank you, Dion. Yeah, I think when looking at this potentially being a Superfund site and another agency coming in, that question of value added for me is actually what value might be taken away, which I think is what Jane is bringing up with the level of cleanup, right? Because funding for cleanup has not been an issue for almost 7 years now, and does not look to be an issue for several years to come. And so typically with a Superfund designation comes resources, comes relief that at this point isn't something that we've experienced. And so that's where I start to question what's the purpose, right? What is, and sure, you want to designate a site, that's fine, as long as nothing's taken away, as long as nothing becomes harder, as long as the cleanup does not become lessened because of that process, right? Those are the issues and concerns that I have looking at this. And we raised some last time we had a public meeting. It'd be great if we got some time to sit down and kind of parse through everything to make sure that we get those types of reassurances, get some documentation around that. But this Superfund designation isn't the gift that it might be in other situations. And so I think that needs to be really clear for us to understand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I believe Mehdi had his hand up. Mehdi, did you still have a question?
No, a very short comment here, and
Okay.
I think it's an important point, is that this funding, at least the way we're discussing it with DTSC, the funding will provide the additional resources that we currently don't have. We are funded currently, but we have a limit that is, for instance, for residential, we have an objective of 5,940 properties to complete by March of 2025. We are not currently funded for the parkways. We're not funded for the offsite industrial, that is everything that's outside the facility. So that's part of the request that we have in this listing. So this listing, if approved, will get us the funding that we need to complete the work beyond what we currently have as far as funding. That's the only clarification I wanted to provide.
Thank you so much for that, Mehdi.
Thank you.
So we have Clara, who's patiently been waiting to ask her question. We're just going to get to one or two more, and then we really got to move on. We want to stay on track here, everyone. Clara, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Yes, I just want to say I agree with Mark and with Jane. I don't think what their comments were. And I also wanted to just mention, I agree that if the EPA's standard is 400 parts per million, and we won't know until it's listed if they're going to use our stricter standards, I don't think that's a good deal. Also, I'm a little bit confused. I joined a little bit late. So the EPA would be a Superfund site on the Exide property, or would the larger community be part of the cleanup site? I didn't hear the beginning of the conversation, so I'm just wondering how it will affect residential homes, and how about homes that are farther out than the current cleanup site area? Thank you.
So I can clarify that in the governor's request for EPA to list Exide, the request included the adjacent industrial area as well as the residential area. So when we're looking at the listing, we're looking at those areas as well. And then from an extent standpoint, once the site is listed, that is the next step in what I described as the Superfund process, is to look at impact and extent, and then our process under CERCLA defines that extent. So we necessarily wouldn't follow the same boundaries. We would make that determination to the extent based on the attribution of the Exide facility and following the contamination beyond the facility.
Thank you so much for that, Edwin. Jim, you had a quick question, and then we're going to go ahead and move on right after you.
Very quick. It's not a
Okay.
question, just a comment about the 80 versus 400 state versus EPA question. I think what I would say to folks is it's certainly an important question, but I wouldn't worry too terribly much about it, because I think that would have to be considered by EPA as what they call an ARAR, an applicable or relevant requirement that EPA would have to consider when devising their own operational plan.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, we will go to our next set of presentations. Thank you, ETAG members, for your comments and questions. First, we will receive General Exide project updates by Mehdi Batahar, Assistant Deputy Director with DTSC. Then we will have a residential cleanup update by Stephen Hariri, Project Manager with DTSC, followed by a presentation from Janice Scully with the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. Mehdi?
Hi, good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight. Next slide, please. My name is Mehdi Betahar, and I manage all aspects of the Exide project. I will be presenting tonight a quick recap of our budget history and status of residential cleanup. I will then follow up with previous public questions that were raised during the public meeting and present some updates as well as milestones achieved to date. Next slide, please. Prior to July 2021, all authorization totaled about $251 million, and this budget was for DTSC to, one, sample all of the approximately 10,000 residences within 1.7-mile radius around the former Exide facility. Two, is to clean up to 2,500 properties with highest level of lead in soil and greatest potential for exposure. And three, developed a jobs training program, which is known as the DTSC Workforce for Environmental Restoration in Communities, also or commonly known as WORK program. As of October 21st, 2022, for the estimated fiscal year 21-22, we have expended $246.9 million out of the 251, and there is a balance of about 4.2 million. This balance is reserved to cover for some unforeseen work that needs to be performed on certain properties. Next slide, please. As the slide shows, 87% of the funds have been assigned to remove the contaminated soil and restore the properties. Another 8% of the funds have been used for sampling. That means 95% of the funds have been assigned or used for cleanup. 4% of the funds have been assigned or used for project quality assurance, the work program, communication, etc. And about 1% of the funds are for IT support. Next slide, please. On July 2nd, 2021, Governor Newsom approved legislation that directed $322.4 million for DTSC for the residential cleanup. Out of the 322.4, 29.1 were used to complete cleanup of 3,200 properties by December 2021. 76.5 million were encumbered in contract. That is a total of 105 million of used or encumbered funds to date. $160.5 million are in process of being contracted for cleanup of remaining properties with concentration exceeding 200 parts per million. That will leave a balance of about $56.3 million. Next slide, please. Now, a few points regarding our cleanup contract that warrant some clarifications. The DTSC contracts do not include any bonus or incentive for the contractor to clean up faster. The cleanup contract is a hybrid contract, and by the way, it is available on our website. That includes both fixed prices and time and material. In other words, the labor charges are covered for the time crews spend cleaning up properties. Equally important is the fact that the current cleanup contract carries the same costs despite 22.8% inflation recorded since January of 2021. This inflation is based on the data collected from the California Construction Cost Index published by the Department of General Services. As to the next contracts, we have published on our website an updated schedule for the public solicitation. And we welcome all qualified contractors to bid. Once again, detail of this solicitation are available on our website, and the request for proposal will be released on December 28th. Next slide, please. Based on our records, we are on schedule to complete 5,940 properties by March of 2025. And although inflation, as I said, has increased by about 22.8% since January 21, based on that CCCI index, we have remained on tracks with our budget. Next slide, please. For the facility budget, as of October 21st, 2022, DTSC has encumbered $5 million on contract for site operations and maintenance and scoping for demolition of non-regulated buildings. We are working on contracting about $50 million. Contracting will be done through, again, a public solicitation, and all information will be made available on our website. That will leave a balance of $78 million for the next step of cleanup work needed at the site. Mr. Dennis Callahan, one of the DTSC project managers overseeing the facility cleanup, will provide you more detail about status and plans at the facility moving forward. Next slide, please. Now let's move to the general updates. I have also included, like I said, follow-ups on recent ETAG and public meetings, and in general to concerns raised by some of the stakeholders. Next slide, please. On October 20th, 2022, we received the first ruling of the court regarding the ongoing litigation against Exide. Court found that the scientific evidence was insufficient to establish that lead from the Vernon plant could have plausibly caused contamination throughout the residential PIA. Accordingly, court held defendant not liable for cost of cleanup in the residential PIA. Court held DTSC potentially can recover costs for lead contamination within half a mile of the Vernon plant. DTSC is evaluating our next steps, including whether or when to appeal. For more information, and obviously on this, I have to say that we cannot comment on any ongoing litigation. However, more information is going to be made available on our website, and the link is provided on this slide. Next slide, please. We received a lot of questions about the timeline for Estrada Court and when we would clean up. This slide represents the timeline of the cleanup process at both properties. Note that the Estrada Court is comprised of 2 parcels totaling about 21 acres, and that Winewood is approximately 63 acres and is comprised of 6 parcels. In July 2021, Governor Newsom budget, including funding that allowed sampling and cleanup of Estrada Courts and Winewood apartments. Due to their complexity, these 2 properties were scheduled to be cleaned up concurrently. Subsequently, access agreements were obtained, pre-construction confirmation sample was completed, and actual cleanup was completed by February 2022, respectively. The total duration from funding to completion of the cleanup was 8 months. Next slide, please. Regarding the workers' health and safety, I need to emphasize that DTSC has assigned 8 full-time staff members and supervisors to oversee field work conducted by our contractor. Besides tracking our progress in the field, the staff members continuously verify the contractor compliance with all federal, state, and local regulations, including those pertaining to CalOSHA. And we have a list here. It starts with ensuring that staff maintain the training requirements and implement the health and safety plan, ensuring that we comply with the COVID-19 protocol. Now we have the flu, and I can tell you that the protocols are identical. Dust control, we have a continuous monitoring throughout the workday with dust suppression. And heat stress, although it's a little colder nowadays, heat stress becomes an issue or continues to be an issue because it's a physical work. Next slide, please. Regarding the new cleanup approach implemented early this year, in which consists of cleaning up properties on the same street or block, has shown some increase in our cleanup rates. The numbers of cleaned up properties has increased from less than 80 to about 100 properties per month. In addition, there was no major impact to parking compared to before. And although lack of homeowners participation remains the main challenge, we have seen few property owners who were previously reluctant to participate requesting to be enrolled, likely after seeing their neighbor's property being cleaned up. Next slide, please. This was an important information that we shared during our last public meetings, and I think it's worth reiterating that DTSC will not ask you for any money for this cleanup. We have heard that we continue to receive reports of people claiming to be from DTSC or some of our contractors in Exide cleanup area, and they are able to expedite the cleanup in exchange for money. Again, DTSC cleanup services are provided for free, and if someone approaches you with this request, please contact the number that's listed here, 844-225-3887. Next slide, please. Finally, to the main question of the day, where are we with our cleanup today? Next slide, please. As of October 21st, 2022, we have cleaned up 4,218 properties, and we are maintaining 30 active crews in the field. We have completed cleanup of all identified school, parks, and daycares requiring cleanup. We continue to work with the licensing agencies for the daycares to ensure that everyone that appears in their list gets to be put as a priority. Concurrently, and we have secured over 1,915 access agreements from the new released list of 2,352 properties exceeding lead concentrations of 200 parts per million. All properties with access agreements have been sampled, and the remaining access agreements are now taking longer to secure. As such, pre-confirmation sampling has been temporarily suspended. We will resume the pre-confirmation sampling as soon as we collect about 200 access agreements. Finally, we have secured 419 access agreements from the 1,513 properties that were never sampled due to owners being reluctant to participate in the initial sampling process. So those are properties where we don't really know what the soil looks like, and we're hoping to continue working with these owners to get their participation and get this property sampled. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have been tracking our contractors' compliance with the project labor agreement, and I'm happy to report that for the most part, actuals are currently exceeding the hiring goals established in the PLA. The last decrease in new environmental worker category presented during the previous public meeting was attributed to field workers taking time off during the summer season. As you can see, that category moved from 47 to 49%, and we are currently working with the contractor. It is very likely that we will reach 50% by end of this month. Next slide, please. As always, I would like to thank all the residents that signed up for the cleanup and welcomed us in their homes. We are so very grateful to all field workers who managed to keep this job going every day. For those field workers who are attending this meeting today, please extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to your colleagues. And without any delays, I will pass it on to Mr. Stephen Hariri, Residential Cleanup Project Manager.
Thank you, Dr. Bedahar. Good evening. My name is Stephen Hariri. I am the project manager for the Exide Residential Cleanup Project. The following slides present a brief update on the current status of the residential cleanup. Next slide, please. As a recap, this map presents the preliminary investigation area where our cleanup efforts are active. The preliminary investigation area includes the 7 jurisdictions outlined. The area includes the cities of Commerce, Los Angeles, Maywood, Bell, Huntington Park, Vernon, and an unincorporated area in the county of Los Angeles. Next slide, please. This slide presents the 5-step process for the cleanup. It begins with a notification letter to the property owner that their property qualifies for cleanup. Thereafter, the planning phase of the cleanup involves communicating directly with the property owner at least twice before the actual cleanup starts. That includes an initial and pre-construction meeting. Subsequently, the actual physical cleanup efforts commence. Finally, after the cleanup is complete, all documentation related to the cleanup is compiled into a report referred to as the letter of completion. Next slide, please. This slide presents an overview of the limits of excavation for a typical residential cleanup, as depicted in green on the slide. The green area represents accessible yard area that is typically excavated. All site structures, hardscaping, and utilities are protected in place during the excavation. The cleanup plan governs DTSC's cleanup that is an interim removal action measure intended to quickly address the most urgent public health impacts and immediate harm resulting from exposure to lead contamination. As publicly disclosed, the cleanup plan anticipated certain limitations that would prevent the DTSC from removing all lead-impacted soil from the properties. Next slide, please. Specifically, the cleanup plan and work plan recognize and authorize the following conditions as presented that prevent DTSC from reaching a depth of 18 inches. Excavations against houses, garages, outbuildings, driveways, sidewalks, structural perimeter walls, fences, and patios are benched as necessary to avoid undermining structures. The areas are excavated to a depth of 3 inches within 6 inches of set structures, creating the bench shown, and then excavated to the assigned depth at either a 1-to-1 slope or with benching that achieves a maximum of a 1-to-1 slope. Areas around trees and established shrubs are excavated to approximately 6 inches below ground surface unless roots are encountered within the drip zone to avoid root damage. Areas within approximately 6 inches of underground utilities are not disturbed to prevent damage to the appurtenances. Excavations near electric poles are benched and do not exceed 12 inches in depth for a radius of 2 feet from the edge of the power pole. And lastly, if the contractor encounters other features, such as unregistered underground storage tanks, septic tanks, pipes, or other features that interfere with the planned excavation. Next slide, please. The next slides provide a brief update on the residential cleanup currently underway. Our main focus now is on individual residences. Next slide, please. This slide presents the residential cleanup progress. The preliminary investigation area includes approximately 10,000 sensitive land use parcels. These parcels are comprised of single and multi-family residential properties, schools, parks, daycares, and childcare facilities. As of October 21, 2022, approximately 4,218 parcels have been cleaned up. 9,092 parcels or decision units have been sampled, and just over 1,094 parcels in the preliminary investigation area have not been sampled. DTSC typically reaches out to a property owner about 7 times. Notifications will be sent every 60 days until access is obtained or cleanup is declined. DTSC honors the request of a property owner previously reluctant to participate in the program for sampling and cleanup. Next slide, please. This graph shows the progress of our cleanup efforts from May 2018 through October 2022 of this year. The solid green line shows our steady progress to date, the number of properties cleaned up, and the yellow dotted line shows our projected number of parcels to be cleaned up. We are on track in accordance with our schedule. In May and June 2020, cleanup was slowed due to COVID-19 and subsequently due to excessive smoke in the valley from nearby wildfires. DTSC achieved its goal of cleaning up 4,000 properties by August 2022. Next slide, please. This table presents our cleanup efforts for the schools, parks, and daycares in the preliminary investigation area. To date, a total of 31 schools, 16 parks, and 79 daycares have been identified in the preliminary investigation area. All schools, parks, and licensed daycares have been cleaned up. There are no additional schools or daycares requiring action. DTSC continues to receive and monitor an updated list of daycare facilities in the preliminary investigation area from the California State Community Care Licensing Division on a quarterly basis. Next slide, please. We are also actively building a backlog of properties for cleanup so that the work will continue into 2023 and beyond. We are committed to addressing contaminated soils for those residential properties that qualify for cleanup. Recently, as of October 2022, we have reached out to 2,352 property owners with lead concentrations over 200 parts per million to notify them that their properties qualify for cleanup. As a result, we have received 1,915 access agreements. Concurrently, we have secured 419 access agreements out of a list of 1,513 that have been reluctant in enrolling in the sampling program since 2017. Next slide, please. Protection of the health and safety of workers and the community while maintaining quality of the cleanup work is paramount. Workers and equipment tend to compete for space in small areas. Workers are reminded daily to be vigilant while working around mechanical equipment. Statistically, the highest injuries that occur in construction are related to slips, trips, and falls. Workers are reminded daily to practice good housekeeping and keep workspaces clear at all times. Safety is everyone's responsibility, regardless of their role or rank on the job. The next wave of COVID-19 is anticipated to coincide with the flu this fall season. The COVID-19 protocols will be maintained. The protocols include, but are not limited to, the recommended use of masks, proper hygiene, and social distancing. Currently, the hot weather has abated. The days are getting shorter, and the cooler temperatures have relieved the stress of working outside during the hot summer days. We certainly appreciate the hard work of the field workers and would like to thank them for their professionalism and commitment to this project. Next slide, please. As the state of California faces the driest 3-year sequence on record and drought levels not seen since the late 1970s, Governor Newsom has ordered every water agency in the state to implement conservation actions. On June 10, 2022, the state of California required local water suppliers to implement certain restrictions on outdoor watering. In general, these restrictions included limiting watering of lawns to once a week. Further, more outdoor water restrictions, such as fines or a ban, are being considered if conditions do not improve. Next slide, please. The lack of water will mean that the Exide project will focus more on a limited number of plants when providing drought-resistant landscaping solutions with the most flexibility for the residents. Residents requesting sod will be required to sign a waiver, as we cannot guarantee the proper growth of grass without intense watering for the first few weeks following its installation. This is a real challenge in light of the drought conditions and new water restrictions. Next slide, please. If you would like more information, please contact our public participation manager, Ms. Dion Falk, or myself at the addresses and phone numbers shown. Additional information on the residential cleanup project is available on our website at dtsc.ca.gov. I would like to take this opportunity to reach out to any resident who has not provided access or participated in the cleanup to please contact us. Your participation in the program protects you, your family, and your neighbors from future exposure. Thank you, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And now we will have a presentation from Janice Scully, Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. Janet?
Hi, thanks for the invitation to present tonight. I'm not able to start my video. I think someone might have disabled that ability on my end, on your end. Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Janet Scully from the LA County Department of Public Health. I have 3 services that we're offering within the Public Health Department that are available to the Exide impacted communities. So I wanted to make sure that you were fully aware of these opportunities. Next slide. So the first one is Lead Free Homes LA. The county has funds to offer free lead paint hazard remediation services. This includes the interior and exterior paint of homes. Next slide. Here are the various funding sources that the county has to conduct lead paint hazard remediation. I'm not going to go through the slide, but we want to be transparent about the grant and the other settlements the county has for this work. I'll take the next slide. So to qualify, the home must be built before 1978. A child under the age of 6 must live or visit the home frequently, or someone in the home must be pregnant. In general, we're targeting regions around the county that have lots of older homes in low-income neighborhoods and lots of kids under the age of 6 because they're the ones that are at highest risk for lead poisoning. Next slide. So this map is very familiar to you all. We're currently recruiting in the Commerce, Bell, and Maywood area through December 15th. So do not delay. If you or you know someone who could benefit from this service, free service of lead paint remediation, please sign up to see if you're eligible. We previously recruited in Huntington Park, Boyle Heights, and East LA. Applications are accepted online or through our contracted partner agency called Impact Assessment. And their email address, it looks like it's cut off on this slide, but I do have the information that I could put in the chat if there's an email and also a phone number. I'll take the next slide. So here's our website. It's available in English and Spanish. You can click on the See If You Qualify button for more information. We also have testimonials from people who have completed the remediation process. And we also have before and after photos on the website for those that are interested. I'll take the next slide. So I don't have time to go over this slide in detail, but ultimately this slide shows the process from start to finish. We want to make sure this work is done well, and it requires several steps that take time. In summary, there's an application process, verification of eligibility. We don't ask for any documentation of income or residency. Assessment to determine if there is a lead paint hazard. Then we develop a scope of work to be completed. We work on relocation planning if it's needed, and that's also completely free. And then we conduct the actual remediation work. And then we close out the process with an inspection to be certain that the hazards are fixed. I'll take the next slide. LA City has their own lead paint hazard remediation program. So we wanted to provide you with their flyer as well. They have their own requirements and their own process, but we work very closely with them. And the next slide. So here's my contact information. You can reach out to me via phone or email. I also I don't have slides for these next two, but we also have free blood lead testing available again in the area. So Roybal Health Center, which is located in East LA, is offering free blood lead testing. So I can put the phone number in the chat, but for those that are interested, we have kind of restarted that service. We're also working on offering free blood lead testing through Quest Labs, and we should have that in place in early 2023. And just a reminder, parents and guardians can take their kids to their pediatrician and request a blood lead test anytime. And actually pediatricians should be testing, especially young children's blood for lead. And then lastly, we have our Enrich program, and this is it's a new community pilot project that increases the availability of developmental screenings and services in the Exide impacted area. And this program was created in direct response to parents asking for support and assistance navigating healthcare systems and education services. So this program that we're running with Public Health in partnership with Children's Hospital Los Angeles, the East LA Family Resource Center, and Ultimed is just kind of getting going in the community. We're working with about 100 families currently, with the majority currently receiving behavioral health services and routine developmental screenings. So there are several services that are provided. We can help with regional center applications. We can help with individualized education plan development. We have free developmental screenings. We have support with navigating healthcare and educational systems, and we have some resource trainings. And families can self-refer into this Enrich program through the Family Resource Center. And I have a contact name and email and a phone number for the Enrich program as well. So Dion, I don't know if it's helpful for me to just send those things to you separately or put them in the chat.
You know what? You can definitely put them in the chat. And then we're allowing our community members to make copies and take pictures of the chat so that they can have that information. Thank you so much. I want to thank our presenters, Mehdi Betahar, Stephen Hariri, and Jenna Scully for your presentations. We're going to go take some questions and comments from our ETAG members. And then I will invite some of our public members to ask questions and make comments as well. There are 4 ways that we can make our comments and ask questions here today. If you are participating on Zoom, please use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. You will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn to speak. If you dialed into the Zoom audio, you can press *9 to join the phone queue. I will say the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak, and then you will press *6 to unmute. If you would like me to read your question, click the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. I want to remind you again that our chat feature is being used for DTSC informational purposes. So please continue to pay close attention to our chat as we are providing information, contact emails, and phone numbers and updates. And so that information will be available in our chat feature. We will allow you additional time at the end as well to make copies of that information. Lastly, if you called into our Spanish interpretation line, our Spanish interpreter will ask your questions for you. So at this time, I would like to invite our ETAG members to ask questions. And I see that that Pete Reyes has his hand up. So Pete, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, sorry, I have 4 questions and I'll go right, I'll go through it just because I don't want to take too much time, but they are for Mehdi. Before Grant left, we would meet almost weekly with Mark and then myself. And the last thing he said before he left was that the contract was being extended to 400 more homes before the new contract came in place. I'm not sure if I understood right. Did he say that the contract is still not, they're still bidding for that and we don't know that? And if that is the case, how long do you see this going, or when would we know that with that new contract is coming into effect? Secondly, in regards to the workers and health and safety, he said they hired 8 new workers. I'm just trying to see how that works for safety issues in regards to 30 crews. How does that look like when 8 people managing that, or is that 8 people adding to more safety workers that are already there? Just to see how that plays out. Thirdly, there was a pause in regards to EFI Global and sampling, which I belong to, and I don't see that being mentioned at all. So I'm just trying to figure out does Mehdi have is there a reason for that? And then from what I understand, it has to do with access agreements. So definitely want to know where we're at with the access agreements. And lastly, I'm not sure if I'm going ahead of you guys, but I don't see anything in regards to what we met with last week in regards to their survey. So just want to know if that's being brought up or not, because I do have comments regardless on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Mehdi,
Thank
did you want to go ahead and respond?
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Uh-huh.
For the contract, and that was presented in one of my slides, what we currently have is NEC is currently working on the residual part of their contract, so work does not get interrupted. We have made the commitment to have these contracts be solicited publicly, and the schedule is online. You're going to see that the RFP, the request for proposal, is going to be released publicly on the 28th, December 28th, with the hope that we can get contract executed, I would say, by end of April, give or take. That's what the schedule is mentioning. So that's an ongoing process. The second question you have is for staff oversight. The staff that we have, each member is overseeing about 4 sites. So they tour the sites, take notes, document everything that we need to do, including compliance / issues that they encounter. For the sampling pause, yeah, you may have missed it, but this was one of my slides. I kind of said that right now we have sampled all the properties where we have access agreement, and we have a good backlog. The backlog we have currently can carry us all the way through half of next year. So we do have a lot of properties in the queue. Unfortunately, to replenish that backlog or that list, we need more access agreements. And at that point, we can resume the sampling. I'm thinking at this point, as soon as we have 200 access agreements, we can resume the sampling. And lastly, the survey. This is something, yes, that we discussed, and I know that you guys have we didn't go public until we have a chance to discuss it. You guys had a lot of questions, and you're expecting responses from us. Definitely, we owe you these responses and the documentation that goes with it.
Right, I was just referring to, I guess, let me address the first, in regards to the additional workers. Is there a possibility that the workers are not with a crew at some point and something could happen because the oversight is not continuously, right? Or how does that work? Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just trying to see how that works. I go to one site, stay there, observe for 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then move on?
Yeah, they do spend a solid amount of time per site. In fact, when you look at what we're doing right now, we clustered the properties to give an opportunity to these staff to oversee properties that are close by. But you are correct. We don't have one person per property. We have one person overseeing 4 properties. And trust me when I say you can't have one person overseeing with the hope that it minimizes the risk of injuries or incidents. this is why when you take the training, the 40-hour HAZWOPER and the follow-up 8-hour HAZWOPER, it specifically said that everybody is responsible about health and safety. Everybody, from workers to superintendent to foremen to people who have that certification and step on site, everyone has a responsibility on the safety. So I hope this covers your question.
Yeah, I'm gonna wrap up with two things because I'm assuming we're not gonna talk about the survey then. You're not gonna, because last time when we hung up, we said we were gonna, last meeting, you said the survey was gonna come up, but it's not.
We will have a chance to talk about it. That's what I said.
Oh, you will talk about it today?
No, not today, because you had a lot of questions and we are committing here to responding to your questions. And I know that Rania as well requested a lot of information that we have to provide.
Well, I appreciate your answers, and I just want to say something real quick because I don't know if I'll get a chance, and I'll just be quick with this. But I do think that I'm guilty of this too, and I don't know what was the purpose of the survey, or is it to prove what we say is wrong? Is it to prove that the contractor is good? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. All I'm saying is I feel like we do a lot of pointing the fingers, because it was definitely a survey. And I don't mean, this is not an argument. I'm just expressing that I feel like we're going off what we're really supposed to be, which is unity. And since I've been here for the 5 years, I think we were going in the right direction with Grant. And I feel like since Grant left, it's been lost a little. Actually, it's been lost. I don't see us going anything towards that. I think we go away from that. After these meetings, there's never any follow-ups. We try to point the finger, and I'm guilty of it as well. But I do think that we should start to come and get to a point where we unite, but that cannot happen if there's no transparency, if there's no accountability. For you to just say right now, like, we're all accountable, I don't think that would fly in any government agency. There is a safety officer and it goes down and it trickles down. We wouldn't go to the person way down and be like, well, it's your fault. There would be a supervisor or somebody accountable. So I don't think it's right to say, oh, well, we're all accountable. But until there's transparency, then there'll be accountability, and then there could be unity. But until that happens, I don't think there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of pointing the fingers. So hopefully this erases all that, and hopefully we can work together, because there was a lot of flaws on that survey. And the fact that you're not talking about it today lets me know that you probably either agreed, but it's mind-blowing for me that we spend money on that instead of trying to find quality control, proper training, and just try to unite and see, like, okay, what can we do? So I'll just leave you with that, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to go to Mark. I'm sorry. Did you want to respond, Minnie?
I wanted to thank Peter.
Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead.
And we have to end on that good note. I really appreciate the fact that, yes, I agree. We have to work together, hand in hand. We have to. We're here to serve the community and the people in general. And I hope you guys can make time. I mean, what am I going to say? We have tried to reach out. Sometimes the timing doesn't work. I know that Dion has contacted you multiple times, but regardless, we are here, and I like where you're going with this, and I will welcome this dialogue.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Maddie. We're going to get to our co-chair, Mark Lopez. Mark, please go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thank you, Dion.
You're welcome.
These meetings are always really difficult for me. I think some of the new information brought today, some of the information that was presented at the last meeting that came up today, raises a lot of red flags for me. And I feel like some of this stuff is potentially setting up to justify not doing a complete cleanup, to justify not expanding the cleanup area, which, we've said time and time again, we think is needed. We've been conducting soil samples outside of the current PIA, and we know it's needed. But I think a lot of this meeting is not saying how it is, it's saying how it should be. This is what should be happening at the cleanup sites. This is how the cleanup should be happening. This is how the local hire goals should be met. A lot of it is theory, and it feels like you can play back the recording from the last meeting, the meeting before that, the meeting before that. You might get a staff change here or there, but it just feels like we're on a loop. And it is part of why some folks who are ETAG members who have been engaged for years stop coming. It's really concerning, because again, it's not a reflection of what's happening on the ground. And so when you are in touch with residents, when you're in touch with cleanup workers, but then you come to these meetings and it's disconnected, it does force that question of what is this for, right? I think we've heard public comment here from workers, from residents who have witnessed. I know many of us have heard directly from workers about issues with monitoring, about how there's worker intimidation when workers speak out because monitors are not properly set up, right? When protocols aren't being followed at the work site, that protect worker safety, that protect resident safety. We know workers have been ridiculed, right? Have literally, like if they're on a playground in a middle school, all the way to the extent of being fired, right? And then when we look at local hire, we've been hearing about nepotism within that of how, because of a lack of enforcement or compliance, folks are able to skirt the process and get their peoples in. Contractors are able to get their workers in, even though they might live hours away, and folks are able to get their family in. That was not the intent of the local hire requirement, right? But if nobody's checking, then hey, we can show that graph as if everything is fine, right? And I think one of and I pointed to the article earlier that Mariah Castañeda wrote for LA Taco, because one of the things that's talked about is a worker who was run over by a machine at a cleanup site, who eventually died. And the person who was operating the machine wasn't qualified to be operating the machine. But because of lax work standards and enforced kind of timelines on how quick work needs to happen, this is actually a common practice, is what I hear of folks operating these machines when they're not qualified. And then to hear that this individual was actually promoted to a foreman, and his crew was also where we saw the pickaxe incident that happened a few months ago, right? And so to see this kind of pattern arise, to learn about this, is extremely troubling. And on top of that, workers don't feel safe to speak out. This is something that we've heard time and time again. I don't know how many times workers reach out to share what is happening at these cleanup sites, but say, I don't want you to share it because it's going to come back to me. They're going to identify me and they're going to fire me the way they have fired other workers. You know how the contractor is. You know how they bully us. You know how they push us out. You know, and this is the best job I've ever had, right? Essentially, right? And also emotionally for residents who are literally taking poison out of our communities. So when all of this happens and continues to happen, despite that we've asked for more oversight, that we've offered to work to try to figure out infrastructure for workers to be able to report, to ensure safety for workers and residents, to make sure that the cleanups are happening properly, nothing has happened, right? And then as we've called out for the removal of NEC, not continuing the contract with NEC, we were told that there was supposed to be a new contract in December of 2021. That's what we looked at as our opportunity to move on from a problematic contractor. And tonight we hear that might be possible in April 2023. And this whole time we continue to see a bad actor operate and create harm, right? And this is what calls to question whether DTSC is adequately overseeing this cleanup. right? So when we hear all of these presentations, it's just really difficult to take all of that in, understanding what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate your comments. I wanted to see, do we have oh, go ahead. Yes.
Very quickly. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. It's always hard to hear when any workers, not just site, but any site is injured, because this is construction is a difficult word, right? And the injuries are usually not small injuries. So it's always painful. I can tell you that both incidents have been investigated by Kalosha. I also understand that Kalosha has shown up recently on site with inspectors and their supervisors. So they're conducting an audit. We're going to know more about this. To the question of the meetings themselves, we owe you transparency. These presentations are giving you what we have, the facts, the data. So you guys are aware of where we are today. I think you deserve to know it. The community deserves to know it. And as far as the compliance, I know that for instance, you were talking about locals, non-locals, and this question that came very often. I know that you have requested documentation, that some of it has been sent, and we continue to send you the documentation, so you can see by yourself that there is a lot of documentation that we gathered, and people who are verifying those numbers. And obviously from the paychecks and from everything else. So we do look, we have a unit that's in charge of looking at that documentation, the same unit that's going to be sending you all that information that you requested. But again, I go back and say any injury on any site is just something it's never good news. It's never good news.
Thank you for that, Mehdi. And then we still have 2 more presentations that we're going to get to quickly. So I'm going to go to Jim Wells real quick, and then I'm going to go to Rania, and then we're going to hear from our 2 last presenters before our time runs out. So Jim, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself. Go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Dion. My question, it really follows along on Mark's theme of theory versus practice. And I wanted to go back to Stephen's comments about situations in which excavations can't reach the 18-inch target, or a similar situation where confirmation samples at 18 inches or at the total depth of excavation are still high. So this is a real dilemma because we've decided as a group that the goal here is to get all soil greater than, with greater than 80 parts per million soil or lead out of these yards. And there are these situations where we can't do it. And I believe that's a pretty common issue. I think a fairly high percentage of the homes that have been cleaned up fall into that category. And I wanted to ask Stephen or Mehdi, when I went back to the cleanup plan, there's a discussion of this issue, and it talks about, in situations like that, conducting a further evaluation to evaluate whether or not additional action is needed in these situations where you can't get to 18 inches or where there's still high levels of contamination at the base of an excavation. And it dawned on me that I don't know what that, how that works. Is that happening? And if so, could you, explain briefly how that process works?
Stephen?
Yes, you can go ahead, Mehdi.
No, I was saying maybe Stephen can answer that question.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. As I stated, it is an interim measure, and it has to be evaluated after we remove the most contaminated sites. And we have yet to revisit those sites to do the analysis. But yes, it does remain, and it is an interesting area to consider. Thank you.
And very quickly, Jim, it's those are things, like you said, that were anticipated in our master plan that was approved in 2017, right? So you know the situation. You have been in the business of remediation. Sloping is a requirement just because of geotechnical reasons. Trees, we get a lot of questions about the trees and say, why can't you do more? We need to understand that once you start undermining the roots of a tree, the tree may die, and it becomes the biggest hazard, because if there is no root to sustain or stabilize that tree, the first wind will take it down and maybe fall on the house. We've had instances where the owner would cut their trees and say, this is it, go ahead and dig it out. So we do. But in most of the cases, the owners would like us to save the tree as much as we can. So those are the limitations that we are finding on a day-to-day basis. We do look into not just the tree, but also any geotechnical reasons when we excavate. And that's what Stephen has shared with all of us tonight in his presentation.
And ever so quickly, I truly appreciate that. This is a dilemma where there's no best answer. And I guess what I would throw out there, though, is that there is a commitment in the cleanup plan for further evaluation, and I think it would be great to engage this community in figuring out what that means and kind of queuing up, a plan or a protocol for looking at that and deciding, are there places where we need to go back?
Thank you so much for that. We're going to turn over to Rania Sapti, ETAG member. And Rania, go right ahead, and then we're going to get into our last two presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. I did have a couple of questions, and after Mark's comment, I almost, like, my jaw dropped, and it's so sobering what he said, and I feel blindsided. That information, that important, has not been shared with us at any meeting before. That I feel is powerful, and I'm kind of speechless to that. I also want to say that, and so I have, whatever comment I had, I'm dropping, and I'm so glad he took all the time that he did to share with us information that I would have liked to have heard from DTSC themselves at the time. Number two, I don't know if I'm doing the math right, but I'm noticing there's 25 people that are attending as panelists. I believe if people have labeled themselves properly, there's about 6 ETAG members. There are 41 members on this ETAG, or is it 31? I don't remember. Either one, there's so little representation. And as amazing as these meetings may seem to people, we are so underrepresenting this community, and something has got to change. If you keep doing something in the same way and you're getting that little participation from your community advisory group, that says a lot. Just something to point out. And I wanted to share that. So I don't actually know how many people are ETAG members. I wish they would raise their hand right now and we could take account. How many people are actually ETAG members? Could you please raise your hand?
All righty. While you're doing that, we are going
to, excuse me, I was talking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I overestimated by saying 6. Let's say 7. let's say 8, let's say 10. I look at your webpage and I think it lists either 41 or 31. So that in and by itself represents very little at these meetings. Something to think about. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to transition to our last two presenters. And we will then hopefully be able to hear all of them. We're trying to still end on time if possible. We want to be respectful to our community. So our next two presenters will give updates on the facility closure. And that will be Dennis Callahan, Senior Hazardous Substances Engineer with DTSC. And we will receive updates from Jason Aspel, Deputy Executive Director with South Coast Air Quality Management District. So we're going to go ahead and start with Dennis.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dennis Callahan. I'm a Senior Hazardous Substance Engineer with DTSC, and I'll provide the update for the Vernon facility. Next slide, please. These are some of the ongoing O&M activities that we're performing. The facility is no longer active and all the manufacturing buildings have been demolished, but we still do maintenance for the administrative type buildings as well as the facility grounds. And we also provide 24/7 site security. We do permit compliance with our Air Quality Management District Title V permit, as well as our Los Angeles County Sanitation District wastewater discharge permit. For air compliance, we water the site 3 times a day to keep dust levels down. We have 5 air monitoring stations located around the facility that we monitor 24/7 for lead and arsenic concentrations in ambient air. We have a wheel wash station that we maintain where any vehicles or trucks that come onto the site go through the wheel wash prior to leaving the site. And we have a wastewater treatment plant that treats any water generated from the watering or stormwater, treats it on site and discharges to the sanitation sewer system. Next slide, please. This slide shows the lead concentrations in ambient air for the 5 stations. It's 30-day rolling averages for the lead from May 2022 to September 2022. And you can see from the graph that the concentrations are low and below the permit limit of 0.1 milligrams per meter cube. And this makes sense since the site is not active and the manufacturing buildings have been demolished. Next slide, please. In addition to O&M related activities, we just finished sludge removal for one of the wastewater treatment plant holding tanks. This is to ensure that there's enough headspace available for future stormwater events. And you see in the photo, the crew using high pressure water to loosen and dilute the sludge so that it can be vacuumed into a truck for offsite disposal. Next slide, please. And these are some of the activities that we're planning. We're planning to decontaminate and deconstruct the non-regulated buildings. We currently have a work plan we're reviewing and are evaluating CEQA for this work. We're working with a contractor for the scope and budget for the work, as well as we're working with them to reroute electrical that currently goes through some of the buildings that we plan to demolish. And excuse me, finally, we're working on scope for a new contractor to complete the remaining phase 1 closure investigation and to evaluate site cleanup alternatives. And we anticipate this work to be done first part of next year. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks, and give it back to Dion.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Appreciate you. And now we'll go to Jason Aspel from South Coast AQMD for some updates. Jason.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Aspel. I'm Deputy Executive Officer, Engineering and Permitting at South Coast AQMD. I will try and go along fast and be respectful of everyone's time, but be providing a regular update for compliance, monitoring, and permitting activities related to the former Exide site. As Dennis said, site continues to be subject to their Title V permit requirements, which includes the closure implementation plan, as well as the fence line ambient air limits in South Coast AQMD's Rule 1420.1 for lead and arsenic. Those limits, as Dennis presented for lead, 0.100 micrograms of lead per cubic meter of air. And then also for arsenic, it's 10 nanograms of arsenic per cubic meter in a single day. The lead average is averaged over 30 days for that limit. So, again, the site continues to conduct daily monitoring at the 5 monitoring locations, even when there's no activity on site. That's a requirement. And these results are provided to South Coast AQMD for review and have continued to show compliance with our limits, and the concentrations have been very low since our last update. So additionally, South Coast AQMD continues to operate our own monitor on Indiana Street, adjacent to the facility. That's operated once every 6 days to ensure there's consistency within the readings. And then there's also 2 additional ambient monitors that are in standby mode at the facility. And those 2 have been ramped up for operation in the recent past for very specific activities at the site, such as exhaust stack removals, more to add an extra layer of certainty that lead and arsenic levels remain compliant for special circumstances. So results at that South Coast AQMD monitor has remained low as well, and consistent with the results that have been seen at the facility. Our enforcement team continues to have a field presence and periodically performs inspections and responds to all air quality complaints filed to our 1-800-CUT-SMOG complaint line. Since our last update, there's been no updates regarding any new violations or enforcement action during this recent period. And also, as part of this effort, inspectors also inspect the residential cleanup efforts that are subject to our Rule 1466. On our permitting side, I'll be very brief on this. There's been no activity since there's no pending permit applications related to the Title V permit. That permit remains active, but we do continue to work with the DTSC and the contractor regarding upcoming plans for the remainder of the upcoming site work. And then to keep the public informed, South Coast AQMD continues to update our website dedicated to activities at Exide. And you can access it by going to aqmd.gov and entering Exide in the search bar. And all permitting compliance information is updated periodically. And also the recent ambient monitoring results are posted for our AQMD monitor, as well as you can have access to the permits for the site. As I conclude, I'll just add again, if any of members of the public wish to file any air quality complaints regarding these activities or any other facilities for air quality issues, they can do so by calling 1-800-CUT-SMOG, CUT-SMOG, 24 hours a day, or you can file a complaint through our phone app for South Coast AQMD. That concludes my presentation tonight.
Thank you so much, Dennis and Jason. We appreciate your updates. At this time, we will go back to our ETAG members and community members for questions. If you are participating on Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. You will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn to speak. If you dialed into the Zoom audio, press *9 to join the phone queue. I will say the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak. You can then press *6 to unmute your line. If you would like to read your question, click the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and type in your question, and I will read it for you. I want to remind you that our chat feature is being used for DTSC informational purposes. And lastly, if you are called into our Spanish bridge line, our Spanish interpreter will ask your questions for you. Let's see, I will see if I have any questions. It looks like I don't. Let's see, Jim Wells has a question.
Very quick question for Dennis. Just out of curiosity, what are the lead levels in the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant?
We don't have analytical data for the sludge for that. It's disposed as RCRA hazardous waste at the U.S. Ecology facility in Beatty.
Thank you. Is that your only question, Jim?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to the Spanish bridge line. I'm going to check in with my team members. Can you check in with our Spanish interpreter and see if we have any questions? Team, do we have any questions?
No questions on the Spanish line.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I am going to go to, let's see, we have, we're at 7:31. I'm going to try and get to like 1 or 2 questions from our community members, and then we're going to end. We're just going to be a few minutes over. So I'm going to ask Gina to unmute. And Gina, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Okay.
It's a 2-part question, and I'll make this quick. I did post a question on the Q&A, but I just wanted clarification about the Enrich program. How are families aware of the program? What kind of outreach is being done? And then the second question is going back to the soil cleanup project. Why are residents being reluctant? Have we conducted studies, or have we looked into further into that?
Okay, thank you so much for that. I believe your first question would probably be answered by Janet Scully. Janet, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. So we're primarily doing outreach through the partner agencies, so Children's Hospital, Ultimed, and the Resource Center. That's how we're getting the word out for the most part. Some DPH, but it's mostly our partner agencies.
Thank you so much for that, Janet. Appreciate you. And I believe your second question was related to reluctance of some of our community members. I would like to see if Mehdi or Stephen would like to come on and briefly talk about some of the reluctance with some of our community members.
Thank you, Dion. So for the question of outreach, we have multiple ways we are outreaching. We have people canvassing, literally knocking at doors every single day. We are sending every 2 months, every 60 days, we send a notice to property owners so they can move forward with the cleanup. We have different cases. The picture is not horrible. I mean, look at it this way. You have about 2,300 properties that are on our list of 200 ppm and above. We have collected slightly above 1,900. So we need about 300 to 400 access agreements. We continue to get these access agreements, but they're not coming as quickly as we wish they would. Looking at how it's conducted and the results we're getting, sometimes it takes 7 times knocking at the door to get a positive answer, sometimes 10, 13 times. We're not giving up. We continue to do it. It's just that we wish, because work is going so fast at this point, we wish to have a little bit more access agreements. And we continue to build that backlog. But it has been our experience that the collection of access agreements slows down. The first two-thirds comes to us very quick, and then we have to really work hard with the property owners. The second issue that we encounter is sometimes the homeowners are not living there, and they're not giving us that access agreements. So we work with them even remotely. We try to work with them and convince them that it's necessary.
Thank you so much. And before we end, I'd like to acknowledge our BES board member is on the line. I'm going to ask her to unmute. We have BES board member Lizette Ruiz on the line. Did you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for participating in this very important meeting. I know that a lot of our community members have felt very, you know, have just, you know, felt very disappointed in the process and haven't, you know, came back to these meetings, which is unfortunate, but I'm hopeful that, you know, together we can work to get this cleaned up. I myself actually grew up, you know, not too far from the perimeter of the 1.7 miles in Huntington Park, and so I'm hopeful that one day we can expand this area to clean, you know, all impacted residences. But my question is regarding those who are renting. Is there any plan to you know, put more pressure on the property owners? And then my other question is regarding the whether there's any because I understand that, you know, making this putting Exide, the impacted area on the Superfund site will provide additional funds. Is there any way that you know, that it will become a problem if any other administration takes place that might cut the Superfund program? Might it in any way limit the funding through a change in administration? And those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Did we have Edwin still on the line too? Did you want to address that quickly, Edwin?
Yeah, the question was, could a change in the administration affect the funding? I think that's it's kind of a premature question to answer right now, because right now we have to look at first, will the facility list, then we have to go through the CERCLA process and look at what the extent is and how we would address the cleanup. So you know, that there's, like we had talked about before, there's many different types of funding. There's fund lead funding, there's enforcement funding. So at this point, the eligibility for the site for funding is what we're trying to determine right now.
All right, well, thank you so much. We appreciate all the comments and questions here. We are over time, but we want to thank you so much for hanging in there with us. First of all, we like to thank our ETAG members for joining us this evening. We hope that we did a pretty good job of answering a lot of your questions and comments and concerns. We will have follow-up, and so you can look forward to that, to my emails. You know, I email you guys all the time. You can look forward to my email and follow up to some of your questions and comments today. We will make sure that we get those questions answered. I'd also like to thank our co-chairs, Director Meredith Williams and Mark Lopez, East Yards. And with that, we are going to go ahead and end this ETAG meeting. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to you. And we will see you in 2023. And what we will do is go ahead and leave this line open for 2 minutes to allow all of our community members to access and make copies, take pictures of the important information that was posted here in this chat. Thank you all so much. Be safe. Happy holidays.